Hey, here's something I wanted to share with everybody. It's something you can do yourself, and I hope you give it a try. It's a neat way to do small, quick studies, whether you're working outdoors or in the studio. I like to start by simplifying the big shapes, and one key to doing that is to work relatively small. And another thing I like to do, you'll see me working here on a piece of cardboard. It's not a precious surface like a fine art canvas or an expensive panel. The ironic thing is, even when you're painting on cardboard, these paintings are very permanent when they're dry. I have a number of these things on my walls that are 20 and 30 years old that still look like the day I painted them. So this is an inexpensive way to work, and it gets you off to a quick start using techniques that you might find a little bit risky. You feel like you're taking chances, but because you're working on cardboard, you're not overly concerned. If you don't like it, you haven't wasted an expensive canvas or other panel. And yet, ironically, if you like it, you can save it and it's quite permanent. So what I've done here is begun by working on the biggest dark shape that's going to be in this composition. And that will allow me to compare all other darks and lights in the painting to this area and make sure that everything works in relation to it. Does that make sense? So first thing I've done is sketched out with the side of a pencil all the elements. Now I've got that foreground tree that's supposed to be in shadow, and I want to make sure that I now paint these background trees, these distant trees going across the end of the farm. I want to make sure that they contrast in value and color with the tree in the foreground that's supposed to be in shadow. These distant trees are hit directly by sunlight. I did this sketch, by the way. It's a relatively small sketch. I did it on location, but before I painted on it that day, I simply made some notes about the colors that were going to be in this thing so that I could use that sketch the way I would have done on location, but I can use it in the studio and film this so that you guys can watch what I'm doing. Now again, one of the reasons for working small is because it forces you to simplify the elements in the composition. If you start doing this thing on, say, a 12 by 16 panel or something, it's going to encourage you to start putting in a lot of little detail. And when I'm doing quick studies, I don't want to waste my time getting detail on one small area of a big panel. I want to capture the big shapes, the main idea that I want to convey in the painting. I want to capture them as simply as possible. And working on a small panel forces you to simplify, and it helps with that. So here you see how we've done now the distant trees in sunlight and how they compare with that foreground tree. And once we get those elements nailed down, that comparison between those elements will allow us to work throughout any other part of the composition we want to. So if you get a couple of the main elements in your composition that are most important, if you get them done first, then you can take your time and play with everything else. And so that's what I've done here. I started with my darkest dark shapes. Then I worked on important shapes that were going to be compared with that, the distant trees. But those distant trees are supposed to be hit by sunlight. That's the way it was when I was out there on location. Once I got those in, I can jump around on the panel anywhere I want, do any part of the painting I want. So don't feel like there's a specific formula that you need to follow. My two key things that I would suggest that you try to stick to are working small so that it forces you to simplify the big shapes in the composition, and work on some kind of surface that you don't regard as expensive or precious, so that you feel willing to take chances and play with options that you might not do if you're afraid of ruining a nice, big, beautiful linen panel or something like that. So here I put in the clouds. I'm blocking in the basic blue sky right now, and I think I'll soften some of those edges on the clouds in a minute. Also, I think I have the blue sky a little darker on the right-hand side of the painting than I want it to be. So mix a little bit of white into my sky color in a moment, and I will lighten that just a touch. Yeah, that's better. That's better. That's going to work better. And once I get those elements done, then I'm going to drop down to the very bottom of the composition. And remember that tree on the right is in shadow. Well, it was casting a shadow across the foreground. So I want to block that in too. But I want to put in a little bit of color interest. So I'm playing with colors that you might not literally see when you're out on location. This is where I take artistic license and play with it to kick it up a notch. Do something that people wouldn't expect to see, but make it work with the overall composition. Now, once I get these basic things done, then I can play with any part of the painting I want to. Like here, I'm adding a little light blue into the left-hand side of the foreground, and the right-hand side is a little more purplish. Now I'm going over the blue on the right with a darker blue, and over on the left there you saw I introduced a little bit more green into it. Now I'm going back into the distant background. The whole message here is, once you get the big elements of your composition, the main elements, once you get them established well, you can then back up and take time and play with adding all the detail you want. Now, if I wanted to, I could go into these distant trees and put in limbs and that kind of thing, but it's not necessary really. This is a small study, and it's meant to be just a study, not the finished painting. And I often use these as a guide, once I'm back in the studio, to work on large paintings that are on canvas or linen or a board. But right now, all I wanted to do was capture the main elements of the composition and see if it would really work well for a larger painting. Okay? And assuming it does, fine, you can add all the detail you want to when you're working on a larger panel. But here, right now, I just wanted to keep it simple. Put a little more green in there at the transition area, and there we go. That's all we needed to get done on this particular piece. And I hope you'll give this stuff a try. Email me sometime and let me know how it's going for you. And by the way, I have a lot of other videos and ebooks online. You can look at the links below this video and when you're on YouTube and find those links. But I wanted to give you a couple little things that you could use right away and give it a shot yourself. Okay, so have a great day and happy painting.